Welcome to Keep IT Healthy podcast, a show hosted by people making things happen in technology, aiming to optimize healthcare delivery, health, well-being, and fitness. My name is Jan Kamiński and I'm the co-founder of AppLover, a company dedicated to improving the quality of life with IT solutions and digital advisory. We started making this podcast to amplify great thinking to propel healthcare forward. Our guest today is Mikael Mattsson, the CEO at SVExA. Hi there.
Hello, nice to be joining you on this podcast.
Thank you for joining. And we'll start with a very simple one. Can you tell us a backstory about what brought you to this particular career path?
It could have been an easy one. It could have been a straightforward one, but it's not really. It's it's just by chance and a different opportunities. I was never attempting to be neither a researcher nor an entrepreneur. Uh, this entire thing with the research career and also with SVExA going forward was because I was trying to be a better coach for athletes, endurance athletes of different sorts. So I thought that I need to take some courses at the university. So I had everything from psychology to stress management to organizational courses, and then realized that they had a good one at Karolinska Institute in Sweden in physiology. So the idea was only to do one semester of physiology at Karolinska and then be done with it and I get the certificate and then continue with my coaching career. It turned out that that course was by far the best one I'd ever done, and it also had a kind of a stepwise. You could do the B course and C course and D course. And the A course was a prep course for medical doctors as well. So it was like 200 people in that course, but then it narrowed very quickly. So you just had a few people. Yeah, I think it was 40 people in the B, and then when we came up to D level, it was 2 or 3 people per year. So because of the work we did there with ultra endurance athlete and the thesis work and a lot of research papers coming out of it, I got the chance to continue with a PhD and then continue as an assistant professor immediately after, and to get to more resources, better research maybe. I moved to Stanford 10 years ago, Stanford University in California, which happens to be in the middle of Silicon Valley. And in Sweden, you're supposed to do either business or research. At Stanford, it's kind of the other way around. You're a bit weird if you're a professor and don't have a couple of startups. Uh, so over the years, the combination of precision medicine, the group that I've been at, still at Stanford, still in at Stanford, um, and knowledge about cardiovascular medicine, genetics, biomedical data sciences, and later on technology as well, like hardware technologies, and my knowledge in physiology, we were in a too good to be true situation, like all planets aligned situation, to start SVExA from that as kind of a spin-off from physiology at Karolinska and precision medicine from Stanford.
Okay, so you were an athlete and then a researcher and then an entrepreneur in that order?
Even coach in between there. So athlete, I got a couple of national medals, but wasn't really that good. So turned coach pretty early, and then from coach to scientist to entrepreneur, definitely.
Okay, so I will start with the sport because when I was researching since the age of 8, right? You have been practicing different endurance sports like running, cross country skiing, and other, and but you and pretty recently participated in Adventure Racing World Championships in Paraguay or the America's Toughest Race in Oregon, right? So these are like extreme endurance marathons, like 250 or 500 kilometers. So I would even call them extreme survival school in the desert, or I wouldn't even say, I mean, I don't know if that's even a sports competition, something just unhuman in a sense, like from the endurance perspective. But how does it help you? Like, do you yourself became an equipment for your scientific research later on? What was that?
I think everyone running would like to be the fastest fastest alive, so 100-meter dash. And then the story is that if you're not good enough at 100, you go to something longer, you go to 400. And then if you're not good enough there, you go to middle distance. And if you're not good enough there, you go to longer and longer. So I ended up with the ultra endurance events. And I started doing them quite early. So I've been doing that for 25 years now. And at the beginning, it was um, the challenge. Can I do this? And then longer and longer, and making sure to survive doing them. And then I raced at higher level for quite a few years in the early 2000s. And then nowadays, I should say that was great, because then I knew the people that were racing at high level in ultra endurance, and had a much easier way to recruit them as test subject for the research, for the science. So, and also knowing what they could be, what stress they could be put under. So, for example, very early we had a 24-hour test in a lab. So people doing kayak ergs, treadmills, and bike ergs in a lab for 24 hours, and testing them every other hour. So I don't think that would have been possible unless I knew the people beforehand, and knew what
Mhm.
would be possible. And nowadays, I would say it's more of a vent, a kind of a reset. So you're correct. I try to do two of these expedition type races a year now. So one spring and one fall, and um, really enjoy it. And it's off the grid, so you are not thinking about anything else than just moving forward. So the World Championship in Paraguay was last fall. Just a few weeks ago, came back from Morocco, Marathon de
But you
Sable.
were in the top 30, right? And you're not a professional athlete anymore, and that's an accomplishment.
Yeah, that's all the years, the historical years. So, and also great teammates to take care of me and push me forward. So the adventure racing circuit, you are four in a team, so mixed gender teams, and it's super hard to be like top 5 or top 10.
Hmm.
But with our experience over 25 years, and being in decent shape, and the experience from all the different disciplines, we can be top 30, and qualify for this year's World Championships as well.
How many hours per week are you training?
I would call that very interval based. So some weeks are a lot, and some weeks are literally zero. Maybe not zero, but very low.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
Okay, and you have participated in many adventure races and ultra marathons around the world. Another recent one was in the desert, on the desert. But what was the most extreme endurance event experience in your life?
It's hard to pick one, because they're very different. You would have the kind of slower pace activities that are strenuous in a different way. So like Marathon de Sable is, you can be competitive and run it, but that's not me. So it's more of a survival camp, and all the other things that you have to figure out as well. So you carry your food and you sleep in a tent and stuff like that. Uh, the year before, I skied across Greenland, so it's an even longer but kind of less physiological strain per day, but high mental, because same as in the desert, you can't get out of the cold, or you can't get out of the heat. You just have to deal with it and continue,
Hmm.
or you tap out, and you don't want to do that. Whereas the adventure races are much faster, harder, and then you can have a race like in Paraguay last year that is really long and really tough. But if you stay kind of under or within your limits, that can be a nice experience. Whereas if you try to push harder to win, even if it's a, let's say, simpler race, it's going to be harder on you.
But do you like draw any conclusions from those races? In a sense, I always wondered if you're running for 48 hours or 72 hours, are you thinking about I don't know, the business or anything in general, you're just thinking about the next 100 meters and the next 500 meters, etc.
The good thing with the long races and several days, basically, in a combination of you have to do the right things, otherwise oh, it's a real risk to die if you do stupid things, because it's in an exposed environment and then might be climbing in there as well and might be exposed positions. From time to time, you will have a need to focus and just do that and be in the moment. Whereas other times it might be super long treks over fields and nothing's going to happen. So in those cases, you need to, or you can allow yourself to think about everything else in the world and what's what's important and maybe solve a few problems and think about whatever's on your mind.
What skills did you use in either scientific work or even, running a business later on?
I think that the obvious, from sports to science to business, is the one is stamina. That it's not going to happen overnight. You have to do a lot of training to be successful, and you also have to plan quite far in advance into the future. What I do today, let's say that I'm supposed to run something in September or in October, I would plan something today that will be the best for September, October, which is very similar to the research. You think of something, you have to plan different steps and how to get closer to that. It will take months, maybe years, to get to the endpoint, and in some cases it works, in some cases it wouldn't, and therefore it's like you might win the race, you might lose, and then you have to redo everything again. And I
Hmm.
think that entrepreneurship should be thought of in a similar way. It's not going to happen the way you want it. You have to adjust. You have to both plan for the long term, because otherwise you will not be able
Survive.
to develop something that is worthy of being new and changing something, be relevant. So it will take time to
Mhm.
get to that level. Otherwise, everyone would do it. And at the other kind of side of the coin, you have the flip side. You have to do something that is relevant now, and then
Hmm.
test it, and then redo everything again.
Did this experience led you to start the company, start SVExA, or what was the story behind, founding your own company?
This the story behind founding the company was more that people started to ask us questions, and we realized that we could answer them, and it was not that common to be able to answer them.
Hmm.
So a couple of kind of seeds to the company. One was a conference in Dublin, and already back in 2014, where they had invited head of sports science and performance coaches and different sorts of tech company together with the it was rugby, football or soccer, and Gaelic football. And then
Hmm.
my role was to listen to 2 days of presentations, and then give the kind of final keynote and summarize the 2 days and look into the crystal ball and say something about the future. And
Hmm.
I clearly remember it was the head of performance at Newcastle Football Club. He showed a slide where he had 11 different data streams coming into him and his team that they'd
Hmm.
manually had to curate and figure out what it meant together. So
Hmm.
at that stage, the obvious conclusion was that they should put them together. They should put all the data streams together and then get an easier way to ingest all the data. That's for from a SVExA perspective. We had way before that started developing algorithms for individualization and understanding that not everyone is the same. And when I moved to Stanford, that became even more like you had new systems in place compared to old group average systems that you could use in precision medicine and pick out what will be the best medicine for you based on your individual profile, mainly in genetics and your history and taking that into account. So those two, the precision medicine and the individualization, combined with you having too much data. And then we were in a very fortunate position again, being in Silicon Valley, that I think most of the big tech companies wanted into health around 2015. and they started building their own watches. That's the first Apple Watch, and all the other ones wanted something similar. And we were the closest research facility for them. So we've done, as researchers, done collaborations with most, if not all, of the big tech companies. And then we realized that they are absolutely great engineers, and they can build the hardware and the software. Our combination knowledge in physiology and practical is somewhat lacking. So you would have a lot of practitioners like personal trainers and have a lot of content, but how do you put it together? How do you be the can you be the translator between the tech side and the user side, the content side? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so we thought that, or we kind of made the analysis that in that space, it's not that many people that've been doing this work for 25 years or have the scientific background and also the practical knowledge of how to do it.
So that inspired the whole concept of exercise intelligence, right?
Yeah, you can say, yeah, definitely, and putting it together, and the broader, like the definition of intelligence, as in the more in the military, it's like information and active understanding and ability to perform computational functions. All of that is in intelligence, not maybe not the intelligence that you would use in
Mm-hmm. But you mentioned a lot
in
of data streams. So what kind of data sources does SVExA utilize, to provide the personal training, support, and insights, etc.?
So, two insights on our side there. First of all, for us to be relevant, we need to be able to take all the data streams that are available. So, in many cases, especially when you work with sports teams, they have been collecting data for years before. And it's much easier to create your profile if you have historical data about yourself. But the data they collect will be different. So if you have a runner, they will have a running watch. If you have a cyclist, they will have a power meter. If you have a football team, they will have GPS tracks. So we need to be able to use all of those from all the providers, and then spend a lot of time harmonizing data from different providers of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, it's the same. So let's say all of these different sports, they might have a heart rate band of some sort, heart rate monitor. All of them have a situation where they need to take the environment into account, so the weather and wind and altitude and, excuse me, all of that. Whereas in some cases they do or they don't have the data. Um, so for us to be able to take whatever's there is one of the core features, key features for us. The other one is that we would be we will be more accurate if we have a lot of different data streams. So if we have subjective data, objective data, if we have data from training and data from away from field, we will be more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have 3 years of historical data, we will be more accurate. But we can't expect anyone to start collecting and then wait 3 years before we give them a recommendation or something. So we must be working in hierarchies, meaning that we have something that we can deliver and give a response to immediately, but the accuracy will be lower. And then the more data we get in and the more data streams we add, the higher the accuracy will be.
But could you also explain how, because we were talking about data, but how those algorithms and software in general contribute to decision support for, sport teams, athletes, companies in the sports sector, in general, the health tech industry, but obviously, sport tech. Like how does it work in general?
uh, uh, a couple of things there as well. So first of all, we're a B2B company, so we license our algorithms to other hardware and software companies,
Mm-hmm.
preferably, and then we work with some athletes and some sports teams to get the data and develop the system basically. And how it works and how to do it, that's obviously in our secret sauce. So that's where our value comes in. What does it mean, all of this? What are the insights for this person? But you could kind of, as an example, we could talk about for cross country skiers, and
Mhm.
just within the same team, same national team, they will have different responses to altitude, going to altitude, and how hard they can train. And if we then can give them an algorithm and calculate and say, skier number one needs 3 days on altitude, at altitude, before they can train hard, whereas skier number two needs 7 days before they can train hard.
Mhm.
Or the vice versa, when they go down, how many days they need before they go down. I gave you one example, but if you have, let's say, the same, let's say a football team, a soccer team, they will have maybe 10 or 12 different data streams, and from that, maybe 150 or more variables that are relevant, meaning that there are thousands and thousands of correlations. So one of the first aspects to help the coaches or the athletes with is to sort all this and pick the markers that are the most relevant for each individual.
Mhm.
So for some, it might be that at this stage they need to think about sleeping more than 7.5 hours. Someone else got no correlation between their sleep and their performance, or illness, or anything else. And someone else is always sleeping 9 hours, but they get cranky and underperform if they sleep 8, meaning that the normal recommendation of sleeping 8 is more than enough for one and not good enough for the other.
Mhm.
And the key here is to put that together and give the recommendations to each individual of all the things that could matter. So you tell someone, make sure to sleep enough, and you tell someone else, make sure to eat your late evening meal 40 minutes later, otherwise you will wake up early and not recover overnight.
Mhm.
And again, these are only examples. Obviously, it will be everything from the training intensity, and if they can tolerate more threshold training or more high intensity training, or how they're gonna ramp up after being away for a couple of weeks in off season recovery, for example. So it's I think the format here of trying to explain all the different examples, it's
Mhm.
we know that it's a bit abstract, but the conclusion that taking all the data, condensing it to picking the markers, the variables that are most important for you, and telling you what to do today to optimize your performance.
In many interviews, when I was reading that, you obviously pay much attention to data ownership. I want to get into that a little bit as well because I have it, and you've said once, let me quote, in the future, you as an individual must own all your data. You must be able to revoke access from someone, and you must be able to give access to someone. So, could you elaborate on that? Why it's important?
So this became, or has been clear, very clear from way before we even started SVExA, and that is, um, traditionally in sports team, it's the sports team or the coach that owns the data and tell you to wear this device or do this thing. And then if the coaching team is disappearing, that data is lost, or the new coach will have some other suggestions, or you choose to change a manufacturer, so that data is lost. So that's a problem. And also, if you move from your youth team to your junior team to your adult team, and then you switch teams, you will start from scratch again and collect the data. And even within a season, one of the first projects we did was SVExA, was with a Premier League club, where we looked at the data, and they had great data over the season, had full control of the players, and then they were away for 10 days on national team duty, and then they had 10 days of data loss in the middle of the season, and then a few weeks of their good data again, and then ten days lost. And this is obviously not a good situation, neither for the clubs, national team, or the individual. And I think that the only solution for this is that the individual, they own their own data. They can move it from one club to the next. The data travels with them when they grow, so that you have your youth data and can compare your most recent season as an adult with what you did as a young athlete. And then the coaches, if you want to say, let's say that you are sensitive to high training loads, you can be one of the best athletes in the world if you stay within your limits, but those
Hmm.
limits are slightly lower than the group average, meaning that you can find those examples. You have players in soccer, football, that are great. They make the national team. They get sold to another club, and then they get injured or they underperform in the new environment.
Hmm.
And then in some cases, they move to the next club, third club there, and then they are back at their super high performance level. And many of those situations could be avoided if you traveled with your athlete passport, your player passport of data.
Hmm. So, so that will be like a seamless transfer of data and like integration of medical and training information across different entities, different clubs, different let's say not entities in general. But is the sport market ready for it from the tech perspective?
I don't think nowadays that the tech perspective is the biggest hurdle. I think it would be even possible to do it now. It would be when Web3 and blockchain is more commonplace. It would
Hmm.
be an obvious use case for that. I think that the market is not ready for it yet. In some leagues, like in NBA, for example, on paper, the players are allowed to get their data. In some other leagues, they are allowed to download their own data, but there are
Hmm.
no systems in place for how to actually handle it practically.
Hmm.
And also in some leagues, you are not. The player unions have stopped you from as a team ask a player to measure, for example, sleep because it's away from the game, from the training facility, and therefore considered intrusive. But obviously, the player can choose themselves to measure that, but then it's not connected to the data that they have from the team.
Hmm. But is it connected with the country or a region, or rather a sport and how invested it is in a sense? So the money, obviously, or there's no rule.
The different rules, I would say, in different countries, different league, different sports, and no no consistent framework, no consistent system for how
Hmm.
to transfer data.
Okay. Hmm. And about the data privacy, how do you ensure the privacy and the security of the data collected from, let's say, athletes or teams? And what measures do you have in place to protect the sensitive information? Because obviously these are probably quite important, even from the like a security perspective of their IP and the club's IP. So how it's done?
If you talk about if the question is about our specific case, then it's we try
Yeah.
to have as little data as possible on our side. So there are a few layers here. One is security, and one is ownership, and obviously we have a lot of security in place to assure that we're not leaking any data. That would be an issue. We have kind of the first line of defense, the same way as you do in science, that you remove the identifiers for names, for example, from the data sets and
Hmm.
get a number instead, and have the data stay at the client, the sports team usually. And depending on the situation, again we have to be, as SVExA, we have to be flexible. So we need to
Hmm.
be able to run our analysis on API calls where a sports team or a client sends their data or a request for a calculation, and then they get their response back. In other cases, we need to be able to deploy our algorithms and solutions on prem. So, for example, some of the sports teams would not allow anything to go outside of their facility. Obviously, the same as in a medical field. So we're in a good position to do the same thing there. So some sports teams, military, hospitals would be very similar, whereas other situations they can send the data to get the answer, anonymized data to get the answer, and then continue to store it on their side.
So, like the general take would be that personal ownership of health data, it contributes and it personalizes your trainings, and that's an add-on here.
Yeah, we're pretty confident now. We're doing continuously doing research and showing that if you individualize, if you start from your situation and you train what's best for you, then you're going to get better results. So it's not. I don't think that the premise there is anyone arguing against. It's just how do I know me as an individual? How do I know what I should do today?
What types of sports or activities does SVExA technology cater to mostly? Is it applicable only for elite and like professional athletes, or is it for recreational amateurs as well, or it can be used that way?
So first of all, the system we've built and are building, we started with elite athletes simply because they are in a more controlled situation. They have more data, they do their training, and they train for a specific goal, meaning that the optimization problem is pretty straightforward. You train to be swimmer, you go to your pool, you do your training sessions, you have them logged, you have your sleep and nutrition logged as well, and you are competing every weekend, and you try to become tenth of a second or a couple of hundreds of a second better. So that's a good starting point. It turns out that the same kind of structure of creating your passport and your profile, having a library of different potential outcomes, and running the optimization engine is similar across many different situations. So it can be done. We've done work with recreational athletes now, where the accuracy will be a bit lower. So if we can be
Why?
because they have less data, they have less number of data streams, and they have less historical knowledge, and they're also living their normal life. So they do a lot of other things that are not directly related to the training.
Do you have any like a sport or discipline that you feel, let's say, or is it right now your core discipline where you help out, or not really? You're divided into many disciplines.
Uh, we're divided into many disciplines because the goal going forward is to be able to cater to anyone in any situation. We should be able to tell you what will be the best for you to do today, irrespectively of your goal or sport, or if you're working towards longer life in longevity research, or if you're working towards more accurate trading in the afternoon, if you're a Wall Street trader,
Mhm.
or more alert and accurate if you're a in the military. Um, but we would just as an example, we started with football, soccer because they asked us. It's a bit tricky to quantify performance for let's say a defender in a team sport.
Mhm.
So we went into endurance sports that are more controlled, so swimming, running, cycling,
Mhm.
triathlon, for example. We have strength training as well, which is a different beast altogether. And
Yeah.
just to, we've done projects with baseball and boxers, MMA fighters, and to show that it works in different situations. Our next project is around golf. So golf training recommendation engine, which is very different, but follows the same principles, and we can reuse some of the modules, have some new modules, but have the same structure. So we're thinking if we can go from swimming to football
To
to
golf.
fighters to golf, it should be
Okay.
pretty clear to the outside world that this could be applicable to any sport, any situation.
And based on your research work, what would you say, like, what connects the most elite endurance athletes in the world in terms of genetic determinants of, physical fitness? I know you did a lot of research on that when you were assistant professor.
And still do, actually. That's one of the projects I have. One of the main reasons I came to Stanford in the first place was for sports genetics, and taking the individualization. The obvious step for individualization is genetics, and finding your genetic profile and figuring out what to do. Back then, 2012, we started one of the projects with best endurance athletes in the world. It's called Elite, still available at Stanford and still enrolling participants. But when we started it, it wasn't known if you needed a specific gene variant or a set of specific gene variants to be able to reach the very top. Now we're 10 years into the research. We've had almost 1,000 athletes with super high VO2 max, super high in aerobic fitness, and also realized that the only thing that we know is that it's not one profile. It's not that you need one genetic variant to be able to be great. There are different ways, different genetic profiles, different physiological profiles to reach the same level of performance. So then it's more a question of matching your profile, genetic or just your profile, with the type of training, type of activities you should do, and the things that you are most sensitive to.
So there isn't any. So you can't say that based on that you are inclined to any particular sport, but rather a genre of sports with this, as I understand that.
Yeah, you have. Let's dig a little bit deeper into this. So, in some sports, the more complex sports, the less genetic determination, because you can be great. You can be a great
What do you
soccer
mean by
player.
complex sport?
Yeah. So, for example, a very straightforward sport would be 10K running. That's an endurance event.
Okay. Yeah.
100-meter dash is another straightforward sport, and you would try to
Mm-hmm.
run as fast as possible, and that's the only thing that's there. It's not it's a bit of technical, but it's not much.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can go to one level of more complex in terms of that it's a higher technical skill, but you can determine some of the effects by your size. For example, discus thrower would be beneficial to be tall and with long arms because of the biomechanical aspects, but there's still a technical aspect. So the genetic, you can to some degree work around your genetics
Mm-hmm.
and be better and win Olympic golds anyway. Um, and being Swedish, one of the examples will be the high jumper Stefan Holm, where he's too short to be a high jumper, and height is one of the easiest way to find a
Mm-hmm.
genetic determinant for. Just look at the parents and say you're not gonna be that tall, so don't do high jumping. And he still jumped one of the top jumpers in the world in world championship medals and golds and Olympic gold and everything. So looking at the genetic profile will not determine everything. It will not exclude you, and especially not if you go to more complex sports. And complex in that sense, I mean team sports. So if
Mm-hmm.
you look at different positions in a team, they would have different skills. So you can be fast or slow, you can be tall or short, you can be quick or make sure to be in the right spot. You can be a defender, you can be a striker, you can be a goalie. So in those cases, finding something within your strength and training on your strength is more relevant than trying to do a genetic test. A genetic test in those situations is completely useless. Um,
Mm-hmm.
eh,
But so we're not, in general, we're not doomed, right? So there is still a talent or a different, let's say, measurements applicable rather than only genetics. But the more complex the sport is, then it's applicable. But the less it is, then I understand that genetics is more important.
Maybe we should say that something like sprinting, it's harder to train, whereas endurance is easier to improve. It's a differences in different parts of the world as well, but it's also depending on when you start. Some sports you need to start early to be really successful. Some sports you can start later. Um, and in general, as of today, there are no genetic tests that are relevant, good enough to be relevant and give more information than what you can see from the training.
Hmm.
Hopefully, in the future, we can be better at not excluding or selecting, but prescribing based on genetic profile. Not looking at the few genes, but many genetic variants.
Okay, and your science research interest is not only that, but in general, you find out how the body works, how it reacts in different sports, etc., in different contexts. But so, what are other important conclusions in this field that you have drawn from your own research, other than the one we just mentioned?
Yeah, I think that some of the things we're working on now, I would say that one interesting field that is relevant for both the research and SVExA is that you get technology revolution in what you can measure. And if you can measure many different things, you have a much better chance of finding out what matters and
Hmm.
how to tweak that to your advantage. Um, Old
Hmm.
school, just going by feel is probably pretty good, but you can be more accurate if you have all the data, if you can handle the data. And then, so the technological revolution and being able to measure things in the first place, it's super interesting and combining different types of data. And then if we build on the genetic, that the individualization is very relevant and that it would be bigger variations for people within a sport or within a country than between countries. So it's something that is relevant for how you respond to being sleep deprived or energy deficit or your glucose curves or whatever you look at. Uh, taken into the individualization Taking the individualization into account is super important. But then it turns out that you can find profiles that are more similar. So you can group people, you can cluster people and say you belong to this cluster. And even if we don't know everything about you, we're going to assume that you respond similar to these people that we tested before that are in the same cluster based on the numbers you've shown us.
Hmm. Hmm.
And as I said, there are kind of preliminary data now in our research that based on your ethnicity as an average for that ethnicity, you might have adapted differently to the same performance. So your physiology to reach the same performance level might be different if you're a Scandinavian or from Japan or in Japan or East African. And those genetic adaptations kind of help you dictate what you can be really good at.
Hmm.
So just from an empirical evaluation, you can look at sprinters. They have a specific set of countries they origin for. If you look
That's.
at middle distance runners, you have many great Scandinavians. You don't have that many great Japanese runners. And if you
Uh-huh.
look at long distance running marathon, you have a lot of great Japanese runners, but not many Scandinavians.
Okay.
And now we're starting to be able to map that to physiological adaptation. So, for example, you can have the same performance level at 10K, but you can get that from big engine. It can
Mhm.
be a Lamborghini or it can be a Toyota Prius, and you can go either long or you can go fast and
Yeah.
be wasteful or efficient. And this is in sports, so this is brand new and something that is just preliminary.
Uh-huh.
What we know is that, for example, adaptation to altitude is different physiological adaptation to the same problem in
Mm-hmm.
different parts of the world. So how you solve this problem in the Himalayas is different from the Andes, that is different from the Ethiopian highlands. Um, and that is very interesting because that is affecting everything you do in training and physiology as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. So, like, as for example, Sherpas as that used to altitude in the Himalayas, right? Because they were living there, etc., etc.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
same with the Andes. Well, we can take the Andes and the Sherpas. So, for example, the Sherpas will be great at working at lower oxygen saturation, so they can continue to
Mhm.
go even if the oxygen saturation in their body is low. Whereas the Andes, they have instead higher VO2 max, higher red blood cell count.
Mhm. And I also read in one of the articles I saw, you mentioned the work of the if effects of anti-inflammatory drugs, right, on performance, injury, effects and training recovery. So basically, the research area has extended to also include the ultra running, right, and even military activities with like the emphasis on nutrition. And maybe you can elaborate more on the effects of this work because
Yeah,
it's
so now we're jumping back to original research. So we started. If the last things I talked about was basically what we're doing now and genetic research at Stanford and
uh-huh.
these past years and upcoming years, I would say. And then the ultra endurance, we started that research back in 2005. So a lot of those research papers and questions are maybe from 2005 and 10 years onwards there. And a similar starting point with ultra endurance athletes, the textbook wouldn't work. So, meaning that if you read what it says in the textbook, you shouldn't be able to run the ultra marathon races.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
So something else must happen. And then the question was, what is actually happening? Because we know that they are completing the races at those speeds. So clearly, that's happening. So what is different, and what can we figure out there? So that research question was very broad. So we had specialists from everything from mitochondrial work and biogenesis and efficiency to endocrinologists to medical doctors, and you talked about the anti-inflammatory drugs here. Uh, to my specialty was in cardiovascular system and how the heart and cardiovascular system adapts, and we had people looking into to energy, an energy deficit, and how to improve and improve and survive basically. So if we take the part of that with the anti-inflammatory drugs, it was a bit of a conundrum. So
Hmm.
for example, it's a different situation if you're trying to train and improve or if you're trying to perform and win. So you can have, for example, high vitamin doses or high doses of anti-inflammatory drugs, and you wouldn't feel anything, but you might also blunt your training effect. So it's negative to use it during training. And then if you look at it in performance, obviously anti-inflammatory drugs are also painkillers. So you wouldn't feel that you're hurting. And then we looked at competitions, so adventure racing competitions, and looking at the use of anti-inflammatory drugs and correlated that to performance.
Hmm.
And in those, this just descriptive statistic, descriptive information, but in those races it turned out that the best performers consumed more anti-inflammatory drugs. They also had more muscle breakdown, so basically saying that they used the drugs to be able to push themselves harder, whereas the people at the lower end of the spectrum didn't use the drugs, didn't have as much breakdown, and also didn't perform as well.
But I need to ask you a question on a more personal note because I know you're still a researcher and you do and you know, having your own business. How many hours in a week you work? You know, because you're still a researcher, running your own business, and also doing ultra endurance sports, which is, I'm nothing compared to that, but I mean, I'm an amateur triathlete, and I have like 9 hours per week, which is still, I mean, it's like busy for me. So how many hours do you work per week?
um, I think the question is not to work more hours, but be efficient in the hours that you work. Uh,
Okay.
and in my case, I don't have fixed hours, so I work a lot, but I also enjoy what I'm doing. So for me, the key aspect is that I work on something that I have a bit more control over. I can control my days, and I can take a day off, and I can go for a long lunch at the ocean beach if I want to, and then but I might also work Saturday evening. Um, but it's not the the control and working with something I'm passionate about are allowing me to work a lot more than if I worked a 9 to 5 and someone told me what to do and I would work on something that I didn't believe in.
Okay.
So I think for me, it's all intertwined. So it's a synergy, obvious synergy effects between the work that I do in research and the company. And we've set the company up so that it's part of the company is for us to be thought leaders and develop new science. That's part of what we wrote in the values and philosophy of the company from the very beginning. So it fits, and also having the practical work in the company allows me to
Detach a bit.
uh, I would say that the adventure racing and the ultra endurance, that the detachment and then the off the grid and taking vacations. So those are vacations for me nowadays, more than anything else. It's experience. It's something physical rather than being in front of my computer. It
Hmm.
forces me to train during the rest of the weeks as well. Being able to work in intervals, work hard when needed, and be able to detach when needed, and plan for detachment before it's needed. So make sure that I have parts of the week where I will not work, and also longer stints where I take off completely.
In my opinion, this is very disruptive. I mean, what you're doing is very disruptive on the market. But what are, in your opinion, the current challenges of this particular market, or like challenges or opportunities, in the field of exercise intelligence, data and sport, etc.? How you position yourself to address them.
Yeah, that's a very uh, broad question and a big question. And I think that we can take an analogy with sports analytics. So we usually separate between sports analytics and exercise analytics or exercise intelligence, in that sports analytics is usually game stats, and you can use publicly available data sets and see how someone is. You can look at games and see how someone is scoring, or where it's the highest probability to score, or who should be in what position during what time against what defender, for example. Um, and exercise analytics intelligence, we also need the back end information. We need to know what's happening, and we need to work closer with the team or the athlete or the person. So we need to get the data that is not publicly available. So that's a shift in thinking. It's also a shift in thinking for same way that you had sports analytics, that
Mhm.
maybe yeah, usually you put 2002 as the starting point for sports analytics, where Oakland A's in baseball uh, picked their team based on stats, cybernetics, and at that time no one believed in that, and no one had analysts or statisticians on their roster or in their staff. But nowadays, you could look at any football team, soccer team, and they would have
Hmm.
an entire department with taking care of that, video analysts and whatnot. And we are in the exercise intelligence side. When we started 2018, we were somewhere around 2002 for sports analytics. So we have a lot of education to do, and we have to. So people would say that they don't have the funds for it, they don't have money to do it, which is obviously not true. It's just an allocation. You didn't have money for the video analyst, but now you have 4 or 8 on your staff. So it's a question about prioritization and also an understanding of the value, and that the field must be better at proving value for the end user. If we talk about sports, and same thing in the corporate health world, for example, what's different here? What would be better if we do an individualized approach compared to what we're already are doing?
How do you see SVExA evolving in the future? Are there any like new developments or initiatives that you feel might be the future of that field? I mean, the exercise intelligence.
Uh, yeah, yes. Obviously, we think that it's the inevitable way forward, because now when we can make these calculations, we can calculate what's best for you. If we have all the data and we know your profile, then it would be stupid not to use it for everyone, right? It
Yeah,
would
right.
be and if we continue forward, it would be a commodity. That was something you should have.
Today, you mentioned also that it's very early for a lot of disciplines. So you think it's going to be a span of 5 years or 10 or two, where it will become just a must-have for each team and athlete. This kind of analysis, this kind of data analysis, this kind of approach to trainings and athletes.
So first of all, I think that the field must must improve a little bit. So we're continuously doing scientific research here at SVExA specifically for the things we're claiming. So if we say that individualized training for a runner, for example, is better than a standard program, we are now doing the research to prove that it's this many percent better if you do it this way compared to the standard way. Same with how good are our illness detection algorithms. We need to prove that, and the field as a whole need to be better, more mature in understanding what can be done and what can't be done. What can we do with this type of data? What can we do if we have double the amount or double the number of data streams? So the science need to be more mature to be stable and be able to answer those questions in a
Hmm.
truthful way. And then we see now that for the sports world, it's starting to become something that is more standard and more asked for. And then the question is not if you should have it, it's how you should have it. So you would have rich big teams, they would like to build it in-house themselves. And then you would have all the other ones that would like to get some solution that is smooth and integrate with what they have today. And I would say that from our perspective, we're seeing now that software hardware companies are coming back to us, and I guess a bit of maturity that they're starting to understand what it can do,
Hmm. And
and
why
those
it's
are
needed,
the
and why it's needed, right?
why it's needed and the value and how it can work, and they are coming with tweaks and suggestions that would fit their situation better, which is something that we didn't see 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And I think that so that will take a few more years, but somewhere in the realm of 5 to 10 years. It's hard to say
Of course.
now. Things are going so much faster, accelerated speed on everything. But 5 to 10 years from now, I would say that it's in sports definitely a commodity. You will be left behind if you're not using the analytics in a better way.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
true.
and during sports and pro teams, if you didn't optimize your players and your opponents are doing that, that would be you would be left behind.
Hmm.
So 5 10 5 years in sports, it would be there. I'm pretty convinced.
Sure. And what about you mentioned some potential clients or teams or clubs coming back to you, but what would be the like the general advice to give to athletes, coaches, teams, or clubs who are considering utilizing services like yours or implementing even SVExA services or implementing exercise intelligence in their training programs if they have no, prior experience with that. So what would be the advice? How to do it the right way?
uh, First of all, I'd like to go old school in my answer there. That the most important part is to do your training and listen to your body. So basically, what we are developing is a system to detect your individual profile and what to do in that situation. A
Mhm.
good athlete and a good coach, if if they listen to those signals, can do it themselves manually. So it's not the starting point. So
Mhm.
just adding more technology can usually cloud the situation.
Mhm.
And if you don't have the entire picture and you listen to one device and listen to one uh, set of data streams, you're missing the whole picture usually. So the first advice would be to listen to your body and take care of your situation and trust what's happening with you, and then build on that by using data streams as a decision aid. And then a company like SVExA would help you condense all those data streams, because we are convinced that it's better to have data from many sources, but then it's overwhelming for the athletes. So you need the layer of condensing and picking the most important parts so that you get two or three things to think about, not 150.
And like I'm curious about the onboarding because I know that probably once you get the data needs to like, you learn on the data, so obviously it's more accurate the longer you analyze it and the more data streams you have and more data in general. But what's the general timing when the improvement is seen? Is it like after a month of using that, or after 3 months, or after 6 months, or it's very individual based on the sport discipline and a particular athlete? Or is there a timeline that is it kicks in?
We would say that we must be able to deliver value from day one.
Okay.
So, for example, if we have something about you, we can backfill your historical data and start that in our analysis. But even with our scientific knowledge, which is pretty deep in the company, and a bunch of PhDs in different areas, so just the scientific advice in the first layer, even if we don't know anything about you more than what you want to do, and your maybe age and height and weight and stuff like that, we should be able to give you a good recommendation. Again, I wouldn't suggest that this is something for the elite athlete, because they have the coaches and they have the data. So that's for a recreational athlete.
Mm-hmm.
But for a recreational athlete starting with any of our systems, Elida is for running training now, and we're adding cycling, swimming, rowing, triathlon to that shortly. There you can start and get your training plan, and it will be better and more tailored to you from day one, but then it will improve continuously, as you said. And the good thing is, while you are improving, your data is getting better and the accuracy of the system will be better.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
And
And
then if we
mm,
talk about corporate health, it is just the fact that you don't just get the standard recommendations, you get something for you based on your situation, will make that better from the get go as well. And your ability to, usually in a corporate health setting, you have a lot of different content. And you can go to a yoga session, or you can be part of the step count competition, or you can get a massage or whatever. And it's up to you to figure out what to pick from all of that in the content. And the recommendation engines that are available are more of a Netflix type recommendation, meaning that you get more of the things that you like, which is not the same thing as more
Yeah,
of the things that you should have.
that should have exactly. Yeah, but you mentioned there are a lot of researchers, and you have a internal knowledge within the company. So, are there any like research and scientific partnerships, and new ones or important ones that SVExA has engaged in to further advance the service, the field of exercise intelligence right now or in the future? You're planning to?
So first of all, we have our own research unit with Philip Larsson, one of the co-founders, associate professor at Swedish School of Health and Sports Sciences. So we have a PhD student and research assistants and people doing work with SVExA data and checking our algorithms. And I mentioned before the study on if individualized training is actually better, for example. And then we still have the connections to Stanford and we leverage the knowledge there, and it could be in the next study there is in digital health, so mobile study for general population and showing that individualized prompts recommendations are better than generic, which is good and adding to what we have here. The next step in that study is around motivational profiles and reinforcement learning and how can we in physical activity we're in a situation where most people know that it's good to exercise, most people know what they could do should do, and they're still not exercising, or they might start but not continue. So how do we then find motivational profiles, same way as we talk about profiles for endurance training, and that some people might be adapt better to high volume and some better to high intensity. It will be this a similar situation in motivational profiles, that gamification, for example, is great for some people but not all.
Mm-hmm.
Social support is great for another group of people, and again, another group of people are information driven, so they want something to tell them why to do it and what happened after they did it.
Mm-hmm.
So the next study there is going to be around teasing out different motivational profiles and behavioral change and actually continuing to do your exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could go on here. So obviously we have a lot of things in the pipeline, and we're not going to run out of ideas and things to improve in this field. But there are a good bunch of efforts now. I don't know if it's biased to what I get
Mm-hmm.
suggested, but there are many situations where you have pretty long term efforts in different countries. So some of them are pretty obvious. You would have for the Olympics, LA, US 2028. You would have for Brisbane, Australia 2032. You have other countries like India and Saudi Arabia that are doing 10-year plans for how to get more medals in the Olympics or other sports. And then you would have other national efforts all over Europe and the US in usage of data and analytics and intelligence to improve their performance. And those efforts might be 6 or 7 years long. So
You have your own in-house research team, but and I just had a also podcast recording with dear Fisher, ex-founder of Training Peaks, and he mentioned that his most of his employees were either ex-athletes, maybe not most, but a lot of employees were ex-athletes, etc. Is that your case as well? In order to have a great product for athletes, are you actually focusing on that aspect to have people that are, as you, right, as an active amateur athlete, I call it, right? Or is not the case?
it's pretty much the case. We wrote in the philosophy and values before we started the company that you need at least dual competencies, meaning that you should be able to talk over the silos. So the idea here is that you could have business people, then they know nothing about the science or they know nothing about the sport, and that wouldn't be relevant for us. And at
Mhm.
the other end of the spectrum, you could have scientists that know nothing about business and nothing about practical sports. So we have a lot of athletes on the team. We have a handful of Olympians and former Olympians. We have now probably the fastest running analyst team in the world, where three of our analysts are uh, training to compete in the World Championships later
Mhm.
this year. We have a professional triathlete that do in the analyst team as well. We have former Olympian in the business team, Olympic swimmer from India in the business team. And then we have, maybe not at the high level, but we have people coming from Wall Street trading, so being analyst and understanding that type of mathematics, that then turned endurance coach. So they have the background with the numbers and then the practical with the coach. We have similarly one of the strength and conditioning coaches now did 8 or 10 years at Microsoft before he shifted careers.
But is it like they understand? Because you mentioned that they just understood the product better, just way better than people that didn't have anything to do in the sport in the past. So you know they could just they understood the features and everything, and they made this product great because they actually could use it on themselves. So I understand that's a similar case in a sense.
Yes, I should also say that this is based on me and one of the co-founders talked about before, Philip Larson.
Hmm.
Before we started SVExA, we had been advising other startups from the physiological and exercise science side. So we had seen examples where the development team had no relation to the data, and then everything takes longer. And if you don't know what you're measuring and you don't know the numbers you are working on, they're
Yeah.
just numbers, meaning that for that team, a heart rate of 400 was not strange because it was just a number.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Makes
but by having people on the team that understand the basics of the situation and then have an interest in the situation, they the idea here is that they are more interested in working with the data because they have some connection to it, and we would be avoid those stupid mistakes of not knowing what the data means.
what would be the three, but you have to name three pieces of advice that you would give yourself at the beginning of your either scientific or business career? I suppose they are combined in a sense. And the advice that you know, to yourself that might be useful for to other founders.
First advice would be work with people and hire people that you like to work with.
Hmm.
B would be uh, think long term and that things will take longer than you expect, and be aware of that. And stamina is important, and
Hmm.
surviving long term is one of the key factors to being successful.
Hmm. Okay.
And the third one would be the opposite of that, meaning get something out, and don't expect it to be perfect, but make iterations as you go along.
Thanks for joining today. And that was a wow, an extraordinary episode in my opinion. I hope we'll be able to do it again sometime. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. This was a very nice talk, and looking forward to joining again later.
Stay in touch with us, subscribe to our podcast, give us a like, comment, or share. If you want to reach out personally, you can find me on LinkedIn and Instagram.